Extend this morning's scripture text to be Matthew chapter 10, verses 1 through 31. The Gospel according to Matthew chapter 10, verses 1 through 31. Hear these words as recorded in the Gospel of Matthew. He called his 12 disciples to him and gave them authority to drive out evil spirits and to heal every disease and sickness. These are the names of the 12 apostles. First, Simon, who we also call Peter, and his brother Andrew, James the son of Zebedee and his brother John, Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas and Matthew the tax collector, James son of Alphaeus and Thaddeus, Simon the zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. These 12 Jesus sent out with the following instructions. Do not go among the Gentiles or any town of the Samaritans. Go rather to the lost sheep of Israel. As you go, preach this message. The kingdom of heaven is near. Heal the sick. Raise the dead. Cleanse those who have leprosy. Drive out demons. Freely you have received and freely you give. Do not take along any gold or silver or copper in your belts. Take no bag for the journey or extra tunic or sandals or staff, for the worker is worth his keep. Whatever town or village you enter, search for some worthy person there and stay in his house until you leave. As you enter his home, give it your greeting. If the home is deserving, let your peace rest on it. If it is not, let your peace return to you. If anyone will not welcome you or listen to your words, shake the dust off your feet when you leave the home or town. I tell you the truth, it will be more bearable for Sodom and Gomorrah on the day of judgment than for that town. I am sending you out like sheep among wolves. Therefore, be as shrewd as snakes and as innocent as doves. Be on your guard against men. They will hand you over to the local councils and flog you in the synagogues. On my account, you will be brought before governors and kings as witnesses to them and to the Gentiles. But when they arrest you, do not worry about what to say or how to say it. At the time, you will be given what to say. For it will be not you speaking, but the Spirit of your Father speaking through you. Brother will betray brother to death, and a father his child. Children will rebel against their parents and have them put to death. All men will hate you because of me, but he who stands firm to the end will be saved. When you are persecuted in one place, flee to another. I tell you the truth, you will not finish going through the cities of Israel before the Son of Man comes. A student is not above his teacher, nor is a servant above his master. It is enough for the student to be like his teacher, and the servant like his master. If the head of the house has been called Beelzebub, how much more the members of his household? So do not be afraid of them. There is nothing concealed that will not be disclosed, or hidden that will not be made known. What I tell you in the dark, speak in the daylight. What is whispered in your ear, proclaim from the roofs. Do not be afraid of those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather be afraid of the one who can destroy both soul and body in hell. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground apart from the will of our Father. And even the very hairs of your head are all numbered. So don't be afraid. You are worth more than many sparrows. May the Lord add his blessing to the reading and hearing of his holy word. I tell you, breaks are important. Breaks are necessary in life. And it's important for each and every one of us to take a break from time to time. I know as a child, I enjoyed recess. I enjoyed the opportunity to get up from the classroom and to go outside to hang out with my friends. And when I was a youth, I even enjoyed study hall. Why did I enjoy study hall? Because then I made sure I got all my work done so that when I got home, I had all the free time I wanted. But that break from sitting in there and hearing a lecture from a teacher was a benefit. But the hardest part about taking a break, I've discovered, is getting back to work. Once you're on that break, it's so easy to stay on that break. But it's so necessary to get back in. Why? Because there is so much work to be done. We should, like I told you last week, we should fast and pray that God would rise up workers for his kingdom. And I tell you, that is something we should pray for this week. That God would rise up workers for his kingdom, even through our church. Now, I want to give you a warning before I go any further. Look at what it says in Matthew chapter 9, verse number 38. Here's what Jesus Christ himself, he says, ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field. We are asking and we are praying that God would send workers out into the harvest field to produce what God wants produced. But if you start to pray for laborers, beware, you may become the answer to your own prayer. You pray, and then you're sent out. You say, God, I want somebody to do this, and then God's going to call you to do it. If God puts a desire on your heart, he's going to make sure that that desire is met. He's going to make sure that desire is fulfilled, and he's going to keep at you until you're obedient, until you trust and say, here I am, God, I'm ready to go. You see, some of these directions in the instructions in this, at first glance, apply just to the disciples. We are called, each and every one of us, to go out. It's so comfortable to sit in the pew. It's so comfortable to sit there and just relax. To sit there and be on break for what is going and what is on around us. But we can look at spiritual principles in what I'm about to tell you this morning. Spiritual principles that are going to deal with what we are called to do as God's servants. So open up your Bible, in case you happen to have closed it, to the Gospel of Matthew chapter 10. And we're going to walk through these 31 verses. If you thought I was going to rush to get out of here, you were mistaken. I'm going to preach what the Lord tells me to preach and then go. But I want you to hear these words. This is what he says. In verse number 1, he says, he called his 12 disciples to him and gave them authority. Authority to do what? Authority to drive out evil spirits. You know, Jesus Christ has still called us this day to do exactly that. We are still in a world where there is a great spiritual battle that is taking place. There are many people that enter into spiritual warfare without even recognizing that they are in warfare. Without even recognizing that the devil is real and that the devil still attacks and there is still evil around us in the world. If you do not believe that there are evil spirits in the world today, watch the news tonight. And tell me how many things in the news deal with godly things and how many things in the news deal with things that are evil. And if you don't see it in our own local town, watch the world news. Watch and begin to see how evil things are around us. And he said, and then to heal every disease and every sickness. The Lord himself, according to Hebrew, is the Jehovah Rapha. The Jehovah Rapha, which means the Lord will heal. He is the great physician. He is the one that is in charge of every single part of our life, including sickness, including healing. We need to have faith that God is able to heal no matter what your ailment is, no matter what your shortcoming is, no matter what you're up against. But when 3 days later rose from the dead and will one day come back again. And that we all have hope and the understanding of the power of the resurrection. He says, here's what I want you to do. I don't want you to go into the synagogue and preach to the church people. He says, I want you to seek for the lost. Now the intention, God sometimes defines. God defines the target audience. Now it's not that he has anything against the Gentiles. It's not that he has anything against the Samaritans. The purpose of this mission trip was to focus in on the Jews. God is going to give each and every one of us a different focus and a different purpose. Not everybody is called to reach the same audience. You see, if everybody goes to the same people, they're going to hear 30 people preaching to them, and then there's another group of people that don't have anybody to share the gospel with them. So God is going to call you, sometimes even out of your comfort zone, even sometimes out of your comfortability, or even your own little pew, and he's going to cause you to go. He's going to call you to go into the mission field and present it. And what he's looking for is to help these people recognize that they are lost, and they need to be found. And the great shepherd is there to find them. And he says, when you go and preach this message. The kingdom of heaven is near. You see, Jesus Christ is coming back. And he is coming back soon. And we have a responsibility as believers to proclaim that message so that those that are lost have time to hear. And so that those that are lost have time to see. And so that those that are lost have time to believe. He says, let me tell you about this man. He heals the sick. He raises the dead. He cleanses those who have leprosy. He drives out demons. Look at what he says here. There is nothing above the power of God. There is nothing greater than God in our lives. And there is nothing that God can't handle. What in our lives are we not willing to give over to God to let him handle the details? He heals the sick, every ailment, every sickness. He even has power over death. He can raise the dead to life. He can cleanse those who have leprosy. Leprosy was a skin disease where you would be an outcast. You weren't even allowed in the society because of this illness. You weren't even allowed in the community. You sure weren't allowed in the synagogue. You sure weren't allowed in the church. But Jesus Christ, even the dirtiest of sinners, is willing to cleanse us and make us whole again. And he says, but I want you to trust me. I want you to trust me. And you see, when God calls us, he says, I want you to go in faith and in trust. And that's why he tells them in verse number 9, do not take along any gold or silver or copper in your belts. Now, their belts was like those fanny packs, okay? Remember those fanny packs in the 80s? Am I showing my age for a minute here? You know, am I the only one that wore a fanny pack? Oh gosh, I feel really good. They're back in style now. So now it would be cool again if I pulled back out my fanny pack. And put the fanny pack in it. They had that little zipper pouch. You know, and you have in there, there's a little purse or the little fanny pack, and you pull in there and you have your money. You know, well, what we would do is, he says, don't take anything with you. Why? Because God is going to provide. If you depend on yourself, if you depend on your own income, if you give a list of reasons as to why you can't do it, then God's not going to use you. It's taking that step of faith. He says, don't even keep a bag for the journey. Don't take an extra tunic or sandals or a staff, for the worker is worth his keep. And he says, go into the town. And if the town welcomes you, then show them your peace. If the town doesn't welcome you, then kick the sand off your sandals. I almost said kick the dirt off your boots, but that's not what I would say there. Kick the sand off your sandals. I tell you the truth, because when someone doesn't welcome the gospel, it would be much better for Sodom and Gomorrah on Judgment Day than it will be for them. Think about Sodom and Gomorrah for a minute. Go back in Genesis. Sodom and Gomorrah God destroyed because he couldn't find righteous people in the city. Because of their sin, because of their corruption, because of their wickedness. He says, I'm sending you out. I'm sending you out. And this verse is very important. He says, I am sending you out like sheep among wolves. What are wolves going to do to a sheep? He's going to attempt to try and tear it apart. He's going to attempt to try and seek and destroy. And Jesus Christ, throughout this entire thing, says, when we are called to minister, when we are called to go out in the world, and he makes reference of it over and over again. Jesus Christ does not promise us an easy life. He doesn't. He says, when you live for him, there's going to be persecution. When you live for him, there's going to be suffering. When you live for him, people are going to put you to death. When you live for him, there's going to be problems. And he says, you know what, in looking at this, it's a wonderful privilege to be an ambassador for the king. But there's a price to pay. You're going to be outcast by other people in your community. You're going to be looked at as an outsider. You're going to be looked at as different and strange and weird. You're going to be looked at as one of those Jesus freaks. But there's no greater thing that a person can say to me than that preacher is a Jesus freak. I love being called a Jesus freak because I'm freaky for Jesus. When we look at this, we begin to see that what we are called and where we are called, we are sheep among wolves. Later on, he's going to quarter it, and not in the text that I covered this morning, but he calls them sword bearers. And he calls them the cross bearers. But what's going to happen? The world's going to hate you. The world will hate you when you live for Jesus. When you're willing to stand up for what Jesus says, when you stand up for the Word of God, there are people in this world that are going to hate you. But he said, don't let that bother you. Don't let that stop you. Don't let that change you, because the world hated me first. It's the same way that Vikings fans hate Packers. And Packers fans hate Vikings. Think about it. And we look and we begin to see that, yes, there's going to be things in this world where it's not going to be the way we want it to be. Philippians chapter 3, verse number 10. I just want to focus there just for 1 second. Philippians 3, verse number 10. Here's what Paul says to the church in Philippi. Here's how he declares it to the church in Philippi when he says these words. He says, I want to know Christ and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of sharing in his suffering. Sharing in his suffering. Becoming like him in his death. Are you willing to die for Jesus? The same way that Jesus was willing to die for you? Well, let's not get that fanatical, Frank. But why not? These 11 men were willing to die for Jesus Christ. They were willing to die for what they know is true. They were willing to die for what was important. And we sometimes aren't even willing to die socially for Jesus. I encourage you to look at that and see. And say that I am willing to know that it's not going to be. But then he says, I'm going to give you a message for free. In verse number 8, back in Matthew chapter 10, Jesus Christ puts it this way. He says, freely you have received, freely give. The apostles had power to do miracles, but even giving a cup of cold water is service to the Lord. Everything we have is a gift from God and must be shared lovingly with others. Everything you have must be shared with others. You know, your money, we need to be willing to share that with others in love of God. You know, your time, you can't do anything unless God gives you the time. Your time needs to be shared lovingly with others. Your talent needs to be shared loving with others. And we don't have the right or the ability to be able to hold it for ourselves and say, no, I'm not going to give, because he's already freely given it to you. Because when you make Jesus Christ Lord of your life, he's in control of everything. So when we look and we see this, we must live by faith. And in the midst when we don't know where the next meal is going to come from, we don't know how we're going to pay the rent. We don't know how we're going to pay the mortgage. We don't know how we're going to do this or that. We need to live by the fact that trust that God will provide. Because God is our Jehovah Jireh. The Lord will be our provider. Even in the midst when everything else that God calls us to do, we begin to worry. We begin to make excuses as to why we can't do it. But God says, I am. And he says, trust me. He will take care of you. The same way he took care of the sparrows that were 2 for a penny. 2 for a penny. He will take care of you. As the scripture says, that not a hair can fall from your head without him knowing it. That your hairs are numbered on your head. I know it's not too hard to count my hair right now because there's none up there. The hair throughout your head. God cares that much about you that he has every single hair numbered. And you see, when we look at this, we need to recognize this point. And I look at my confirmants and say, we need to recognize this point. You get my point? We need to recognize this point. We need to recognize this point right here. I'm trying to help the young ladies out for a minute. God's servants are immortal until their work is done. What do I mean by that? I've heard people say before, I've done my time. It is now time for the young people to do it in the church. And there's a Greek word for that. Baloney. You see, your time is done. Your service is over when you hear these words. Well done, good and faithful servant. Welcome home. But until that time, we are not done. We are still called to allow our work to be done. Maybe our task may change, but that doesn't mean we stop working. You can retire from work on earth, but you can't retire from work from the kingdom. And I don't know, but I've often been told by people who retire that they seem to be working twice as hard now that they're retired than when they were working. Well, let's make it the same way for the kingdom as we do for the world. You know, as we look at this, he tells us the simple fact. He begins to tell us as well. Fear. Maybe it's scary. It's scary to step outside the pew. It's scary to step in the midst of a trust, in the midst of a faith of what we are called to do. But there's one who takes away all fear. If you fear God, you need fear nothing else. Now, the fear that I'm talking about, fearing God, is not shaking in your boots, trembling, fearing God, but a fear of respect to that God. You are precious to your Father. Why do we let the things of the world get us scared? Why do we let the things that don't really matter affect who we are? We are sons and daughters of the King. Just simply put, we are sons and daughters of the King. And even if our life were to end here on earth, as a son or a daughter of the King, we know where we're going. And that should take away all fear. When my wife took her last breath here on earth, she had no fear. She had peace. Anybody who saw her said, there's peace. Why? Because perfect love casts out all fear. And there's only one who has ever or will ever love you perfectly. And his name is Jesus. So friends, we are called to be sent out. We all have our mission fields. It may be here, it may be foreign, it may be across country, it may be wherever. But we are called to serve. And we are called to listen and cast out that fear that stops us from doing what God calls us to do. You see, because there is much work to be done. And there's little time to do it. And maybe God's calling you today. We should fast and we should pray that God would allow us the privilege of being workers and sufferers for the kingdom. Let's get to work. Let's turn to God in a word of prayer as we close that.